If you are someone who you feel like you had bad genes, you didn't get the big butt gene, you've always had a pancake booty, or you used to have a butt and now you don't, you had kids and now you're just stuck with this mom butt that we like to call it, right? We have pancake butt, it has disappeared. What happened to it? You're doing all of these great glute exercises maybe, and it's just not turning on for you. So this episode is to give you 3 tips that are my favorite tips and strategies to really start to unlock those glutes and give those muscles the engagement that they need, the strength they need, and your awareness to help them show up better for you so you can build that booty, girl. It doesn't matter how small your butt is, how small your mom's butt is. It is not just genes. You can get a big booty. And by genes, I mean genetics, right? Also, obviously, genes can make our butts look pretty good too. But this is more about what we can do to help that booty growth. So let's just dive right in. Hey, I'm your host, Dr. Desiree Cassell. I'm an orthopedic and pelvic floor physical therapist specializing in women's health, aka pelvic floor. I'm a wife, mom of 3, foodie, lover of all things movement and nature, and I'm super passionate about educating, empowering, and supporting other women like you to find and maintain balance throughout all aspects of their lives, without pain, pressure, or peeing their pants. And this is the Balanced Momtality Podcast, where we will talk about all things pelvic floor, your core, and optimizing your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum recovery, providing you with the knowledge and tools so that you can feel like the strong, playful, and happy mom that you and your family deserve. Now let's get you out of those pads and back to loving movement. Fill up your water, pop in those AirPods, roll out your mat, and let's connect. Before we start today's episode, just a quick disclaimer that anything mentioned in this podcast is not meant to treat or diagnose any medical conditions. If you have any questions or concerns about your healthcare needs, please seek the care of your medical provider. This is also a safe space where we will be talking about very sensitive but important topics, such as issues with peeing and pooping, relationships, and even sex. So if you have littles around, probably a good idea to pop those AirPods in. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hey girl, thanks for joining me. We are back for another week on the Balanced Momtality Podcast. I hope you caught last week where I dove into the body check. If you missed it, go check it out. It is a great episode on one of my favorite habits that you really should be doing throughout the day. We're really trying to rewire our motor plan, the way our body decides to move and hold itself and posture itself is more about working with the brain than anything else. So make sure you go check that one out, as this is not about fatiguing muscles or pushing things to exhaustion and trying to get strength and power. That habit is a lot more about how your body shows up for you. So go check it out if you haven't, especially if you find that you are someone who has bad posture, or you breathe terribly, or your motor plans don't work as you want them to when you're trying to exercise. Then those are all signs that your natural body's patterning, its tone, its normal written or its automatically written pattern isn't working optimally. So to improve that, we need to be showing up a lot more regularly throughout the day, and the body check is one of my favorite ways to do that. So go check that out if you missed that last week's episode. However, this week I wanted to dive into a different topic that is near and dear to my heart, but also most women and most mamas. If you are someone who you feel like you had bad genes, you didn't get the big butt gene, you've always had a pancake booty, or you used to have a butt and now you don't, you had kids and now you're just stuck with this mom butt that we like to call it, right? We have pancake butt, it has disappeared. What happen to it. You're doing all of these great glute exercises maybe, and it's just not turning on for you. So this episode is to give you 3 tips that are my favorite tips and strategies to really start to unlock those glutes and give those muscles the engagement that they need, the strength they need, and your awareness to help them show up better for you so you can build that booty, girl. It doesn't matter how small your butt is, how small your mom's butt is. It is not just genes. You can get a big booty. And by genes, I mean genetics, right? Also, obviously, genes can make our butts look pretty good too. But this is more about what we can do to help that booty growth. So let's just dive right in. One of my favorite tips for reversing that mom butt or pancake butt is simply changing your posture. So how you stand is a big deal for how your glutes show up or don't show up. So if we think about posture, and if you've listened to my show at all, you know I'm big on posture. And when we're talking about posture, we're really talking about how your body is holding itself with intention or without intention. Are you just slacking and letting your joints hang on themselves, or are you stacking things so that they can work optimally for you? And when it comes to standing posture or posture through an exercise, we really need to look at how the rib cage is stacking on top of the pelvic girdle. And also, how is the pelvic girdle stacking in relevance to the legs and the rest of the body? Because if we think about, say, pregnancy posture, where belly is being pulled forward because of that growing baby. And so it starts to pull you into what we call that anterior pelvic tilt, or what people like to refer as sway back, where you're like sticking your tail out and you're just really arched through your back. We can just visualize how this stretches out the belly and it tightens the muscles on the back. But if we look below at the pelvis, what does that do to the glutes? If we go into an anterior pelvic tilt, that also is stretching out the glutes, just like it stretches out the abdomen. And when our muscles are stretched out, they can't work very well. So there's an optimal, what we call length tension relationship, which essentially means that the fibers in that muscle are overlapped to a certain degree that they have a significant amount of power when they contract together. Whereas if a muscle is really stretched out, those fibers aren't aligned to a place where they have as much power. And vice versa, if they are really compressed and those fibers are overlapping too much, they also will not have a lot of power. So when we're exercising a muscle, we really have to think about where that muscle is in its range of motion. And yes, it's good to have strength through all ranges of motion and to have power through all ranges of motion. And you can train that, and you can build a lot of strength in a stretched out muscle and a lot of strength in a tightened, more shortened muscle. But it needs to be functional, meaning it should be able to stretch out and hold that strength through its whole range of motion. We don't want to just be super strong at end range on either side or only strong in mid range, right? However, when we think about functional strength, a lot of that strength does come from that mid range position, that 50 to 75% of range that muscle goes through. But when we're in a standing posture like pregnancy in that anterior pelvic tilt, that is many times just too much of a stretch for those muscles, so they can't really turn on as well, especially if you weren't focusing on glute strength prior to or during pregnancy. This can just ultimately stretch out muscles that were already weak. And if those muscles started out weak, once they get stretched, now they're really having a hard time turning on. So they might just shut off altogether. And so even if you are trying to do some glute exercises, you might not be feeling it in your butt at all because all of the other muscles are doing their job when the glutes should be doing it. So simply positioning yourself in a certain posture throughout the day, but especially during exercise, is really going to change the game for how those glutes show up. So again, if we think about that pregnancy posture where everything is arched through the back and that tailbone is arched and basically sticking out, right? And those glutes are lengthened. Yeah, it might look like you have an okay booty because your butt's literally kind of sticking out, but it's not going to be engaging well. And then the other posture that you might be going into during pregnancy, but especially postpartum, and even if you've never had a kid, these are the two postures I see a ton in just humans in general, but I think pregnancy and postpartum really encapsulates, or I should say, intensifies these postures and perpetuates them for long periods of time. Hence why we've kind of coined this term mom butt, where it's just like a flat butt, right? And that's not okay, right? I'm determined to be a mom with a booty. And so I have, seen so much change just from changing your posture. And if we think about that other significant end range where you're not in an anterior pelvic tilt, but a posterior pelvic tilt. So this is when that tailbone is tucked and you are, many times if you're standing, this can even put you into like rounded forward shoulders. You're just really tucking that tailbone. And many times you're even hinging forward. So I love this analogy whenever you just can visualize it right now. Visualize the moms at the park holding their babies, bouncing their babies. They are typically, hips are thrusted forward, their knees are barely bent, and they have baby up in their arms, and they are just hanging into those hips, bouncing, hanging into those hips. When really that bounce should be like a pulsing squat up and down. We don't want to be thrusting forward into our hips, but we're tired. We are dealing with kids, and maybe you even just recently had a kid and your sleep is off. You have no energy and you are just tired trying to make it throughout the day. This is when we tend to fall into that hip hanging posture where those hips are forward and we are just hanging on our ligaments because our muscles just don't have the energy to hold us up. But if we untuck our butt, so pulling that pelvis back slightly, this doesn't mean you're necessarily coming out of that tilt. You might not even really be in a posterior pelvic tilt. You might just be hanging forward on your pelvis. They do tend to go hand in hand though. So as you pull that pelvis back, what we should see from the side, if you were to go look in a mirror, you should see your ear stack above your shoulder, stack above your hip joint, stack above your knee, and fall directly behind your ankle. If you see that those hips are just hanging forward and your shoulders fall behind your hip, or maybe you find your ear falls behind your shoulder and your hip, then we know, okay, your shoulders are also slouched forward a ton. We need to try and stack the ear on top of the shoulder, on top of the pelvic hip joint, on top of the knees, and over our mid stance of our foot. So let's just think about how you're stacking those things, because yes, you need to know what neutral pelvic alignment feels like if you want to be able to really optimize your glute growth, because you need to know what range of motion your pelvis is in when you are doing glute exercises, which we'll get into here in a second. Because if you're just thinking anterior, posterior tilt, you might also be missing that shift front and back of those hip joints. So again, just kind of think about pulling those hips back, stacking them in line with your shoulders, and many times that turns the glutes and the abs on almost instantly. So not only does this trick help with your butt, but it also helps with that mom pooch. I know we've put mom next to all of these unfortunate
body appearances, which is not okay. All right. I feel like we moms, we need to be strong and have the confidence to know how to strengthen and hold our body. And let's be real, this is not just a mom issue. This is a human issue based on how we posture and hold ourselves. But obviously, we see this a lot in motherhood. And being that I treat a lot of women and moms, I just see it all the time with women and moms. So we are going to be aware of how we're engaging. But if you're just pulling that pelvis back, you're also going to feel that pressure from the lower belly disappear. And those abs are going to turn on a little bit because now your joints aren't just hanging on the ligaments and you're depending on the muscle strength for support, which is what we need and what should be happening. And because of that, you might not be able to hold it all day, and that's totally fine. I also check in with my posture, again, hence the body check episode last week, pretty regularly, and I many times find that I'm not in an ideal posture, and that's fine. It's not that we want to check in and always be perfect. No. Perfection doesn't exist. It's more that we want to just be checking in. That is where you get the gold star, because then you go, no body, this isn't where we're meant to be, and you fix it, and you're helping your brain rewire, and you're also just taking stress off of your joints off and on throughout the day, as opposed to hanging into them all day. So yes, this isn't always going to be perfect, but you do want to check in, because if you are just hanging on those hips, you're going to increase prolapse risk, incontinence, constipation, tailbone pain. So many issues come from that hip shift where we're just hanging on the front of our hips, because it really compresses the pelvic floor and shuts off the glutes. Now, instead of those glutes being stretched out and having a hard time functioning, they're compressed and shortened and having a hard time functioning. So we need to find that happy middle where we can both tuck our tail and stick our tail out. So finding that nice neutral position, make sure you're stacked below your shoulders and your ears so that you're not hanging either direction in front or behind with the postural piece. And just putting those muscles in a better position so that they're at that optimal length tension relationship will automatically turn things on for you. So that is the number one tip. We need to make sure things are in the right position to turn them on. But then the next tip is to get them to turn on when and how they should. So that motor plan of the glute muscles, are they engaging for you when and how they should? And a sub tip in this tip is to stop clenching your butt. And so this is a sneaky one. That butt clenching, man, it'll get you, because it might go either way. You might find yourself hinging on your hips, hanging into the hip joint, which does tuck the pelvis and kind of shut off the pelvic floor. But because it kind of shortens everything and puts everything in that shortened position, it might all of a sudden start clenching on you as well. Or you might be in a good posture and then just slowly start clenching because you're doing something else. This always happens when I'm doing dishes for some reason, or when I'm working on a patient. And so when my brain is going and running a mile a minute, I just start to clench, I guess. I don't even know why, but it's that awareness that's huge, because at this point now I know, okay, let's be a little more aware during that activity so that I'm not clenching. Because if you just start clenching, you're going to push your pelvis forward and end up in that posture that we don't want. So they kind of cause each other. Although I have to say, sometimes you can just be hanging in that posture and not necessarily be clenching, but it does shorten your glutes. So if you're in that position for too long, then you end up with just tight glutes that have a hard time working. But on the other side, you might even be clenching and overusing your glutes. And this also happens a lot when we're weak. When you don't have strength, the body tries to create whatever strength it can. And usually that comes from a clenching tight muscle. That muscle doesn't know how to be strong enough with enough control to let go. So it just tightens. So yes, part of this is just strengthening those glutes so they don't feel like they have to stay clenched all the time. But the first step well, I should say second step, because the first step is to make sure you're in a good posture, right? But then that second step is make sure you're not clenching. If you are clenching those glutes and they're just always in a clenched spasm state, you're going to contribute to that tension and the inability of that muscle to work through its full range of motion. It might just clench up as soon as you do squats or bridges or deadlifts or anything else that the glutes should be functioning with, and then make all of those exercises that should be growing your butt and glute strength beautifully, instead working your quads and your hamstrings and your back, and those glutes are just staying shut off. So especially if you're someone who's like, yes, I'm doing all of the lower body glute exercises and my butt is just not growing, then let's look at how you are holding your glutes throughout the day, but also how are you posturing them throughout the day. And then that third tip that I have is, how are you engaging those glutes during exercise? And obviously, let's do some glute exercises. So this is an obvious one, because how do we build a butt? We start exercising it. We push it to fatigue. We cause our body to build more muscle mass and more strength, therefore building our glutes. But again, a lot of you have probably tried that. You've done all of the glute exercises and it's still just not working. So that's where we need to look at your posture. We need to look at your clenching. Are you holding tension in them throughout the day? We need to get things to open back up so that they are actually turning on throughout those lifts. So when it comes to strengthening the glutes, which is that tip number 3, really just finding some nice, good glute exercises, which I have a couple episodes on glutes, on glute engagement and optimizing glute strength and all of that in the past. So feel free to check it out. But these are just my hot 3 tips to unlock that mom butt and just start to get it building again for you. So intention changes everything. Again, squats, lunges, deadlift, all of these exercises work out so many muscles on the lower body, especially, that so many other muscles can drive that movement pattern. But we want the glutes to do the work. So even the intention and visualization of physically squeezing your glutes first to make it the first mover of that movement can be a game changer. Simply put your hand on your butt and think glutes. You should feel it engage as soon as you think about it. And moving through that movement pattern, making sure your glutes just don't clench up and stay clenched, right? Like for a squat, they should lengthen on the way down and engage on the way up and shorten on the way up. Like a deadlift, they should lengthen as you lower and contract and shorten as you come up. If they just stay locked in, they're not going to build any strength for you. And with that being said, this is another sub tip. So I know you're getting more than 3 tips in this episode, but if you find that one of 2 things is happening, you're either getting into glute exercises and your butt's just cramping pretty quickly. You can't get through that many before it starts to cramp. You start doing some bridges or hip thrusts or squats or deadlifts, which are all great booty building exercises, but they start to cramp. Or maybe you get through a good rhythm and then afterwards you've just got these really bad spasms and knots in your butt. Or you find you're a clencher and you just already know you're a clencher. Then I want you to release. That means we need to release the tissue before we actually engage it. Because if that muscle is already tight and then you go ask it to do a bunch of squats or a bunch of bridges or hip thrusts, you might cause some trigger points and spasms and make it to where now you have to recover for a full week before you can even do more exercises because you're so sore or it just is painful. And so with that being said, take a lacrosse ball or a massage fascial ball, pin it up against the wall and roll around that ball in your glutes. You can pin it up against your glutes in the back, or you can turn to the side and have it pinned up against your hip on the side glute med, glute shelf muscles, and really just work out any tension or tightness that you're feeling in that space. We really need to make sure we're addressing the muscle's ability to contract with certain strengthening exercises, but also the muscle's control and ability to relax and lengthen, which is where the ball really comes in handy. You can foam foam roll, but I feel like foam rolling can be a little too intense. And I like the wall because you can lean up against the wall with the ball or come off of it if it's a little too intense. So make sure you're adding in some release work with your glute days, especially before, well, if you're having spasms, I would do it before you lift and after, just to make sure that you're opening that muscle up before, but then you're doing it after to make sure it doesn't tighten back up from the strength training that you just did. So make sure that you're checking your posture and you're aligning those glutes in a position that they can work for you. Make sure you're not just clenching and holding them all day, or else they won't know when and how to work for you. And make sure you're doing the right exercises with the intention of those glutes engaging and that you feel them engage and working for you. The other little tip, again, I'm cramming in more than 3 here, so you're welcome, is just make sure you're pushing it hard enough. If you are just doing 3 sets of 10 at a pretty heavy weight that, yeah, you feel like you need a little break and your heart rate gets up and whew, that was a good workout, but you're not really seeing any growth, then you're not pushing it enough. Or maybe they're not engaging and firing right and you need to get in with me so we can make sure of that. But push it. Push those weight training exercises so that your glutes are fatiguing. They are about to cramp. They feel like they are just going to fall over if you do any more exercises. You definitely should be feeling that by the end of your 3rd set, but I think even the end of each set, right? So if you get to 7 or 8 and it's like, whoo, I can barely get to 10. Then you are at the right level, because then you're going to take a full minute off in between your sets to give your muscles the recovery time they need so that you can go back and do a 2nd and 3rd set. Even if that 2nd set is only 8 and that 3rd set is only 6, that is awesome. That is actually a great sign that you pushed it hard enough that you couldn't even finish. Now, if you do that and you are just cramping the whole rest of the day and you are sore for like a week, then yes, that was too much. Okay, we need to not only assess how our body holds form and how it feels during, but how is your body recovering? If you have no real fatigue during and you're like, dang, I probably could have done more, but then the next day you're pretty sore, then actually, I think you did a pretty good amount. So this isn't me just saying go hard right away, but make sure you're feeling out your body and where that boundary is. How do you feel during the exercise? And then how are you recovering after? And use that as feedback for it being too easy or too hard. And not that we need to always search for soreness, because many times the soreness will subside, especially as you get into a rhythm with exercise and your body starts to learn movement patterns. You might not be as sore, but we should be able to push more strength. So each week, try and push it. Only pick one exercise to push, but add a couple reps to it, or maybe try a 4th set with it, or maybe just go right in and add 5 more pounds and see how it feels. But as soon as you get confident and comfortable at a certain stage to where you're like, yes, I love this, it's probably too easy and you need to make it harder so that you hate it again. And this is my reminder as well, because we need to be pushing that boundary. We're showing up. We might as well make the most of it. So I hope this episode just gives you some inspiration and some strategies to start unlocking your glutes and build that booty back. Come back over to the Balanced Momtality Wellness and Support group on Facebook if you haven't already, and let me know what you think of this episode, or if you're having any specific struggles with building your booty or anything else along pelvic floor, women's health and wellness. And also, if you're ready to get in with some coaching, give me a DM, an email, reach out to me on Facebook. Let's get you on a coaching call so that you can be someone that is confident in knowing your game plan, what your root cause is, not having to take all of this guess decision fatigue. What exercise do I do today? What do I have time for? What does my body need? Let's just get you on an individualized plan so that we know what your body needs, what days you're doing what, take the guesswork out of it, and let me do all that for you. I look forward to hearing from you, and stay tuned next week on the Balanced Momtality podcast.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. I know you've got so many other important things going on, but I hope it was helpful and you leave here with some tools to help you in your healing journey. And I just want to ask you, if you have found this helpful, to please leave a review on iTunes. Scroll down to the bottom of my podcast page and leave that 5-star review so it can help other women see this information. And also, if you want to be a part of my community of amazing women trying to balance all the things, great tips and insight and sharing stories and just motivating each other along the way, feel free to join my Facebook group, The Balanced Momtality Wellness and Support. I hope to see you here next time on the Balanced Momtality Podcast.